Richard Jaeckel spent 50 years making movies. He earned $200,000 for The Dirty Dozen alone. Studios called him their most dependable actor. So why did he die broke in a shared hospital room? Last time we dug one together, you dug so deep that when I climbed out of bed in the morning, I was thinking, let's try to reach China this time. Rich Jaeckel, who coached Little League and remained humble, had the worst possible ending to his life. A disease that shouldn't have killed him. A wife who couldn't remember their marriage, and deaths that swallowed everything. At the same time, other actors retired. His family moved at the perfect time. He was born on October 10, 1926 moving from Long Beach, New York to Los Angeles in the early 1940s put Richard in the right place. His father was a businessman and his mother had lofty ambitions, so the family wasn't exactly flush with cash, but they had enough to get by. At the time, the United States was in the midst of World War II, and California's film industry was thriving. Studios were expanding rapidly, and jobs were appearing all over Hollywood. At the perfect time, he discovered something else in Los Angeles. Back in Long Beach, he might have joined the military like most kids his age, but in L.A., he became friends with Luella Parsons, a gossip columnist with over 20 million readers whose opinions could make or break careers. Working as a mailboy for 20th Century Fox in 1943, at the tender age of 17, Richard earned $18 per week, equivalent to approximately $280 today, but this was no ordinary errand job. Over the course of his 176-acre lot, he delivered letters between studio bosses, top executives, famous actors, and producers, giving him a front-row seat to the filmmaking process. Seen, and soon, he was unknowingly becoming a star. Then, one morning, as Richard was delivering mail to the casting office, director Rufus Law Mayer was searching for young actors to portray Marines in a new war film called Guadalcanal Diary, which had a hefty budget of $1, featuring well-known faces like, and had 2 million views. Richard was offered a screen test 3 days later. The test only lasted 15 minutes, but director Louis Sayre cast him on the spot as Private Zeus Alvarez for 6 weeks of filming. The role required a youthful, honest, and realistic actor, and they still needed teenagers like Preston Foster. Filming, Richard made $7,500 more than he would have in 10 months as a male child. The film grossed over $3 million, and his acting career was off to a flying start. However, instead of riding his wave of success, Richard did something that few actors ever consider. He enlisted in the military in 1944, a mere year after his breakthrough, and served until 1948. Richard felt compelled to serve his country, which meant he had to give up years of career development while his contemporaries were landing lead roles and advancing in Hollywood, particularly with war films becoming increasingly popular. While some sources claim he joined the Navy, others say he also served in the Merchant Marine. Richard's real-life military experience gave his role a subtle intensity that viewers believed in, even though they didn't understand why the film was a success or why Wayne received 4 Oscar nominations. He returned home in 1948 with the names practically forgotten until the 1949 Sands of Yuma, in which he was cast alongside John Wayne as PFC Frank Flynn, and everything changed again. Richard's performance was highly acclaimed, but there was something else that made it stand out. Rather than acting the part, he truly became the soldier on screen. His chemistry with Wayne was genuine, and the studios took notice. As a result, he landed more roles, but they were all of the same genre. From 1949 to 1952, Richard was in every major war film. He appeared in Battleground City, Across the. He was great at playing tough soldiers and cowboys, but that was all the studios wanted from him, while leading men were earning fortunes. In his last role, He had just one scene where he played a cocky kid who dies in a duel with Gregory Peck. The scene was short but powerful, showing how good he was. However, it also showed the trap he had fallen into. Richard became known as a reliable, consistent worker who occasionally appeared in multiple films at once, but he was never really a star. Then, in 1952, something out of the ordinary happened. He landed the role of Turk, a daring and flirtatious young man who pursued Terry Moore's character, the polar opposite of his typical roles. The critics were taken aback, but the New York Times gushed about his performance as the boy who sexually pursues her. His sequences with Moore were electrifying, and audiences finally noticed that he could pull off more than simply combat scenes. The movie was a financial success, grossing $3 million. $5 million later, Shirley Booth took home the Best Actress Oscar, and Richard almost finally break free from the typecasting mold, but studios in Hollywood persisted in casting Richard Jaeckel as the reliable sidekick soldier, or actor who could carry a scene but not a poster boy. Despite demonstrating his versatility, he was cast in the same roles again and again. What's more, in 1961 he delved into a more somber tone in Town Without Pity, portraying the role of Corporal Birdwell Scott, one of 4 American soldiers charged with the rape of a 16-year-old German girl. The film was set in West Germany in 1960, shortly after the U.S. formally ended its occupation of the country, and it was a disturbing story. Particularly for its time, the ads referred to it as adults only. The film's haunting theme, sung by Gene Pitney, earned an Oscar nomination but lost to Moon River. Despite this, the film left an impression, and Jaeckel proved he could dive deeply into morally complex roles without compromising his performance. The cast included Frank Sutton, Robert Blake, Mal Sandock, and Christine Kaufman, who later married Tony Curtis in real life. Fear not, for in 1967 Jaeckel donned the uniform once more, this time as Sergeant Clyde Baran, in The Dirty Dozen, his most renowned performance. Baran, a no-nonsense member of Parliament tasked with preparing 12 military prisoners for a suicide mission, said little, but his words hit home. "I believe the first chance one of those lovers gets, he's going to shoot the Franco VR death by hanging Vladkim 30 years hard labor," as he informed Lee Marvin's character, "Major right in the head, sir," that his job was to read off each prisoner's sentence with stone-faced precision. The scene became iconic, and Jaeckel returned for the 1985 TV sequel, where he did more than just appear. He anchored it, making the military feel authentic and the film a smashing success. His ability to bring discipline, grit, and quiet strength to the screen was unforgettable, but his career took an unexpected turn in 1970 when Paul Newman, while prepping for a drama based on a novel by Ken Kesey, saw Jaeckel laughing and splashing around with his children at Malibu. There were no agents or auditions involved. It was just a chance encounter with his children, and saw more than just a tough guy. He saw a brother, and not just on screen, in Jaeckel. Studio executives weren't convinced, but Newman persisted, and he succeeded in casting Jaeckel as Joe Stamper, a logger torn between loyalty and resentment in an obstinate Oregon family. This wasn't just any role, it was the one. In 1972, at the age of 45, after nearly 30 years in Hollywood, Jaeckel received his first and only Oscar nomination for his performance in The Color Purple. The Academy finally recognized what Newman had seen on that beach, the layers of warmth beneath the hard edge, the humor in the pain. And critics found it both funny and tragic. He wasn't playing a soldier this time. Richard Jaeckel wasn't the type of actor you'd expect to make a splash in 1950s television, but he was a serious actor who tried to hold a broken family together while delivering orders and reading death sentences. He didn't win the Oscar, but that nomination proved it all. was a rock-solid, dependable, and tough guy in the film industry, but his work in live television drama was truly remarkable. While most actors dreaded going on television, Jaeckel jumped headfirst into shows like the U.S. Steel Hour, which were more like high-wire acts. One slip-up and the entire nation would see it, yet he stood shoulder to shoulder with stars like Paul Newman, Helen Hayes, and the late, great Rex Harrison and Lily Palmer were among his many television appearances. In 1961, Jaeckel starred in his first television role, Frontier Circus, a horse-drawn circus that took place in the 1880s across California and Nevada. In the role, he played Tony Gentry, the man who. Jaeckel's character was a hybrid of a cowboy and a carny, and his performance stayed with viewers long after the show ended. He rode ahead of the troupe to set up shows in wild, dusty towns, a risky concept that CBS was willing to support with a prime-time slot and enough money to produce 26 episodes starring Mickey Rooney, Sammy Davis Jr., and Elizabeth Montgomery. It became a pattern for Jaeckel to join shows that didn't last more than a season, but he always managed to make an impression. For example, in 1930's Los Angeles, he appeared in Banyan, which aired for only 15 episodes, but was critically acclaimed for his portrayal of Lat McNeil. Similarly, in 1974, from January to August, he was a firefighter named Hank Myers on Firehouse, which aired for only 13 episodes, but he was the. Jaeckel was remarkable as FBI agent Jack Klinger in both serious detective dramas and more fantastical moonshot fantasies. Producers saw that he could keep a story together and cast him in Salvage One, an ABC series about a junk dealer who builds a rocket to the moon. However, only 16 of the 20 episodes that were produced never aired. Even in a sitcom like At Ease, which aired in 1983, Jaeckel played it straight as Major Hawkins, a rule-following officer who was constantly outwitted by scheming soldiers. The show only ran for 14 episodes, but Jaeckel was the showstopper. From 1991 to 1994, he made a triumphant return to television with Baywatch, playing the role of Laddit Ben Edwards, the beach's oldest and most revered lifeguard, was in his 60s when he silently battled the melanoma that would claim his life a few years later. Despite this, he maintained his resiliency on screen, inspiring characters like Mitch Hasselhoff's character with his heroic rescue of a drowning fisherman despite his inability to swim due to a broken hip. As a symbol of perseverance, Buchanan played an unusual role. He had previously appeared in the 1989 Baywatch pilot film, but in a different role, that of a lifeguard who dies saving a child. The producers wanted him to reprise the role for the show's international audiences, so they rewrote his lines. For many, this was their first exposure to Jaeckel at an age when most actors. Jaeckel's uncle John saved the day in 1948 when his 14-month-old son fell into a swimming pool while he and his wife Antoinette were on a tour of San Francisco. No one had noticed the boy's fall, and he had been quietly wandering off, barely able to walk. He was a part of the biggest show on earth, but behind the scenes, he carried an unquenchable sorrow. Research shows that brain damage can begin as early as 4 minutes underwater. The rescue was so quick it almost defied belief, but it shook Jaeckel to his core. That one moment changed him. He became deeply protective of his family, never forgetting how close he came to losing them. Marches happened to step into the backyard and saw the toddler in the water. He pulled him out just in time. His son in a field rife with narcissism and apathy, Jaeckel remained rooted by coaching a West Los Angeles Little League, spending time with his kids, and refusing to let his fame take him too far from home. Years later, his wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but he remained by her side, continuing to work and care for his family even when he faced bankruptcy in 1994. Perhaps that personal suffering is What made Jaeckel such a powerful actor was his 1971 role in Sometimes a Great Notion, in which he played a man who drowns under a tree while Paul Newman tried to save him. The scene was haunting, slow, emotional, and unforgettable, and it earned him an Oscar nomination. However, for Jaeckel, it wasn't just acting. He had experienced the fear of drowning himself, and he brought it to the screen. Joining him on set, Richard Jackekal dedicated his life to maintaining a healthy lifestyle. He never smoked, stayed fit for decades, and appeared younger than his actual age. However, in 1994, at the age of 68, he received devastating news. He had melanoma skin cancer. This wasn't just any cancer, though, it was advanced. For someone as health-conscious as him, it felt like a cruel joke. The cause of Jaeckel's death was the sun. He had been a lifelong surfer, loving the beach, the waves, and the freedom it offered. For years, he surfed shirtless in the California sun, despite his fair complexion and lack of fear. He avoided cigarettes but not the sun, and it was the sun that ultimately killed him. By the time the cancer was detected, it had already spread. He had already finished playing Baywatch's lead Ben Edwards when he received the diagnosis, so he didn't slow down after that. Even in his late 60s, he was still landing roles and staying busy. Hollywood still respected him. His career spanned 5 decades, and he had acted in over 70 films. However, just when he should have been winding down peacefully, life threw him a curveball. Richard Jaeckel declared bankruptcy in early 1994, the surprising amount being $1. At the age of 67, he found himself $7 million in debt, not a little slip-up or temporary problem, but the whole collapse of his Hollywood career spanning more than 50 years and 150 film and television performances. It's hard to believe that Jaeckel had been working steadily since 1943, when a casting director noticed him at 20th Century Fox as a young man. His first film, Guadalcanal Diary, launched a career that never really slowed down. He starred in major films like The Dirty Dozen, which paid him a lot of money. At an age when most actors would be relaxing comfortably in retirement, he was drowning. His home in Brentwood, one of the most expensive areas in Los Angeles, was the first thing to go. It wasn't just a house, it was proof of what he had. He earned an Oscar nomination in 1971 for Sometimes a Great Notion, but all of that mattered now that the money was gone and the recognition didn't pay the bills. Filing for bankruptcy was more than just a legal filing, it was a public fall. Finally got his just desserts after decades of toiling away in Brentwood, the exclusive neighborhood where the well-to-do lived. Now he was being forcibly removed from his home, and with it, practically all of his possessions, including the furniture, awards, photos, and memories he had accumulated over the past 50 years. This wasn't a dignified departure or graceful downsizing. Rather, it was an eviction from the life he had created, and the worst part was, he had worked with legendary actors like John Wayne, Lee Marvin, and Paul Newman, but now those memories were all gone. His career had given him an on-screen heroism, but in reality, he was crumbling. The worst part was when he moved into a retirement home for actors and actresses in Woodland Hills, a facility that had been built to aid those in need. It was constructed with the intention of helping those in the industry who had fallen on hard times. But for Jaeckel, the relocation felt like a profound shame. He had been living lavishly in Brentwood, and now he was living off charity with other forgotten people. At the same time that Richard Jaeckel started his last battle with cancer, his wife Antoinette was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Richard and Antine had been married for 50 years, from May 29, 1947, when their marriage began to crumble. Antine had battled malignant melanoma, and Richard's mental health was deteriorating at the same rate. The timing was cruel, And as Richard's body failed, his wife's memories faded, and the woman who had cheered him on set could no longer support him. He had survived his time in Hollywood, but now he was facing a new challenge. Unfortunately, his health was deteriorating, and he was unable to stop the progression of his wife's illness. Despite his decades-long love for her, he had spent his career on screen, always playing a tough and composed role. Richard, who had shared his health, his wife's mental state, and even their home with her, moved into the Motion Picture and Television Retirement Center in Woodland Hills in 1994. He remained there until his death on June 14, 1997, 3 years later, at the age of 70. By that point, their fights, vacations, and dreams had all faded into the fog. In 1994, he had declared bankruptcy, with a debt of $1. His Brentwood mansion and most of his assets were gone, leaving him with nothing but a hospital bed, pain medicine, and the hollow misery of seeing Antoinette's decline into Alzheimer's. This wasn't only old age, it was emotional torture. His wife was there, but she wasn't really there. $7 million was still physically present, but emotionally distant, even when they were in the same room. He had appeared in more than 150 films and TV roles, sharing screens with legends like John Wayne, Lee Marvin, and Gregory Peck, but, in his last years, there were no spotlights, no cameras, and no applause. Yet, Gregory Peck personally intervened to assist Richard. Within 3 days of receiving the call, Richard was accepted into the retirement facility. Hollywood hadn't officially forgotten him, but they had taken care of his housing needs through the Motion Picture and Television Fund. Despite the industry's respect, Richard still felt lonely and alone, even when he was among friends and family. What he needed most, though, was the physical presence of his wife, and more specifically, her eyes. Acknowledging him, she called him by name, but she was no longer with him. He died peacefully of cancer at an actor's hospital hidden in Woodland Hills. There was no glamour there, just a weary man, a shared room, and the bitter end to a long journey. The media paid him little attention. A handful of trade publications ran brief pieces, but fans brought back fond memories by sharing clips, stories, and gratitude on early internet forums. Many were unaware that he had lost his home or battled cancer, but they were grateful that a man who had worked non-stop for over 50 years was given a farewell instead of a hushed tribute. As I cared for a wife who couldn't recall their past together, the shock hit me like a ton of bricks. The truth was simple but tragic. Richard, a man with a long and illustrious career, had died quietly, rarely making headlines. What stood out the most, though, wasn't the press's silence. It was Richard himself. Throughout his life, he never once complained, not about the cancer, not about the money, not even about the lack of attention he received. He handled every role in his life with poise and dignity, never seeking attention or pleading for favors. His sons, Barry and Richard Jr., noted that he never displayed resentment or bitterness, even in the face of adversity. He never cried in front of the cameras. Instead, he let his work do the talking for him, and that was his ultimate goal: to be known for his character and not for his losses.